This is Pastor Steve with the Word Study number 7. We're going 40 days with looking at words, people, places, and that are found in the Nelson's dictionary, so we can learn together and relearn together. But today's name is Daniel, and we read about Daniel being a prophet during the period of captivity of God's covenant people in Babylon and Persia. And we see he's first introduced in Daniel chapter 1 and verse 6. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now we know these three as the three Hebrew children that were thrown into the fiery furnace as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But we also know that Daniel was a prophet, and we know that from Matthew chapter 24 and verse 15, where it says, very simply, he names some things, and it says, spoken of through Daniel, the prophet. Well, we also find out that Daniel wrote a book in the Old Testament that bears his name, that we referenced to earlier, the book of Daniel. Daniel was a teenager when he was taken from Jerusalem into captivity by the Babylonians in 605 BC. He was in his 80s when he received the vision of the prophecy of the 70 weeks in Daniel 9. In more than 60 years of his life in Babylon, Daniel faced many challenges, but in all those years he grew stronger in one thing, and that was his commitment to God. Well, we know very little about Daniel's personal life. His family history is not mentioned. Now, we do think that he was from an upper-class family in Jerusalem, because most likely Nebuchadnezzar would not have chosen someone from the lower-class folks to be in his court. But he chose Daniel, and neither do we know if he was ever married or had a family. Now, the text does not specify, much about that personal or anything about his personal life, but it does indicate that Daniel was a person of extraordinary giftings and abilities. We tend to think of Daniel as a prophet because of the prophetic dimension of this book of Daniel. But he also served as an advisor in the courts of foreign kings. Daniel remained in the governmental service through the reigns of the kings of Babylon into the reign of Cyrus of Persia. After the Persians became the dominant force in that region. Well, Daniel was also a person of deep piety. His book is characterized not only by prophecies of the distant future, but also of the sense of wonder at the presence of God. Now, from his youth, Daniel was determined to live by God's law in a distant land. But in moments of crises, Daniel turned first to God in prayer before turning to the affairs of state. We find that interesting scripture in Daniel chapter 2, verses 14 to 23, and I want to read that. When Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. He asked the king's officer, "Why did the king issue such a harsh decree?" Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Now, again, we know these are three Hebrew children. These were fellow Israelites, fellow worshipers of the true God. So Daniel goes back and says, I need you to help me at a prayer meeting, and there's some things we need to pray about, really our lives. He urged them to plead for mercy for the God of heaven concerning the mystery, so that he and his friends would not be executed with the other wise men of Babylon. Well, during the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Now, God answered prayer. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, now this is his prayer, "Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He disposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I think and praise you, God, of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we ask of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. Well, we've also find out his enemies even used his regularity in prayer to trap him and turn the king against him, but the grace of God protected him. And again, you can go to Daniel 6 and read that story. But after one of his stunning prophecies, Daniel prayed a noble prayer of confession for his own sins and the sins of his people. This prayer was based on Daniel's study of the book of Jeremiah. And if you want to look that up, it's Daniel chapter 9, verse 2. He was a man of true devotion to God. And I want you to think about that. That last thing we mentioned is praying for him and his people and confessing. That's something we ought to do, don't you think? First, go before God and say, search my heart. Make sure there's no hatred in my heart. Make sure there's nothing in my heart that's against you. And then also confess the sins of our nation, because we are a nation of many sins. And you know what? God is a merciful God, isn't he? And we trust in his mercy that he will forgive. God bless.